My name is Luca. I'm a longtime subscriber, and to be honest, this story has been sitting in my draft emails for quite some time now. I wrote it up almost 2 years ago with every intention of sending it to you, but at the moment of truth, I lost my nerve. You see, I'm honestly not sure whether this was a genuinely creepy moment or just something that became creepy to me because I overthought it. But after reading it over, my wife thinks it's something you'd like to hear because after reading it back, she thinks it's pretty creepy too. She remembers me mentioning it, but I don't think she understood how unsettling it was in the moment. She remembers thinking the guy was being rude, which is definitely not how I remember it. I suppose this is all just confusing information, so I guess I'll get on with the story. Now, slight epilogue here. I'm first-generation Italian-American, and my family have owned restaurants for as far back as anyone can remember. So when my father brought his expertise to Chicago, he did very well for himself. When he died, ownership fell to me, and as much as it was my honor to carry on the family tradition, the restaurant scene had become more and more competitive as the years went by. It got to the point where I wasn't making enough to comfortably put both kids through college and contribute to my retirement fund. So instead of battling it out in an already oversaturated market, I started scouting out relocation options. I don't want to name the town this whole thing happened in. I don't want to dox some poor innocent gas station owner because of some dumb misunderstanding. What I will say is that it's in the Midwest, about 20,000 people, and its proximity to a pretty decent college was a big attraction to me. It looked like a totally regular place at first. Schools, hospital, a whole lot of real nice houses too. But then the more I drove around, the more the places started to seem, I don't know, dead. If I'd paid a visit on a weekday afternoon, I could understand the place being so quiet, but this was a Saturday afternoon. For a town of 20,000, the main high street should have been teeming with folks all looking to make the most of their one real day of recreation. This was most of the appeal for me too. Out in those small towns, there was still the 4 bottles of wine and every appetizer crowds, as opposed to the Grubhub vultures who only hit you up when there are 2-for-1s. Those were the fine people that were going to put my babies through college, but they were nowhere to be seen in this wholesome-looking farmer's town that, in actual fact, didn't feel very wholesome at all. I ended up parking my car somewhere before taking a short walk up and down the high street. With the total lack of people around, and I swear I counted all the foot traffic on one hand, it was a wonder some of the stores weren't all boarded up, and I started to wonder if I'd arrived during some sort of event that drew people out of town or something. I ended up asking an older lady what the deal was, intending to ask her if the town was always that quiet. But then when I approached and asked her as she made her way down the main street, she completely ignored me. I'm not talking a rude side eye and a cold shoulder. I mean, it was like I was a ghost. She just didn't even flinch as she walked past me, and I'd walked right up to her to talk. It was so jarring that I actually chuckled out loud to myself, and I quickly approached someone else to make sure that I wasn't totally invisible. This next person talked to me, but they were far from friendly. Not outright rude, but definitely on the spectrum of passive-aggressive. I asked him where everyone was, and he just sort of shrugged before saying something like, "It's a quiet town. We like it that way." And then he excused himself and carried on about his day. Now, these were obviously not good indicators, and I had pretty much made up my mind already that this wasn't the place. Then, on the way out of town, I saw my car's fuel gauge was getting pretty low, so I pulled into a gas station on the edge of town for a little top-off, and that's where things got really weird. I started filling up my tank from these old-looking gas pumps, and I swear my eyes almost fell out of my head when I saw the price meter. It crawled up shockingly slow, and I realized this gas station was selling fuel at an extremely discounted rate. Obviously, this was just about the least terrifying thing I could possibly imagine, and it put me in a pretty good mood as I walked into the gas station itself to pay the attendant. Inside was kind of rubish-looking older man, sitting behind a counter watching a little box TV, and for the first time since I arrived in that little town, I actually met someone friendly. The guy was warm and welcoming and smiled when I told him how much I appreciated his gas prices. As I paid him, he asked what I was doing in town, and as he opened up the register and put the bills inside, I told him. The second I mentioned the possibility of moving to town to open up a restaurant, the guy's face changed. Not a rude expression, but almost like a fearful one. Then I swear to God, he looks me dead in the eyes and says in a voice barely above a whisper, "Don't move here." I heard exactly what he said, and the whole thing took me by surprise so hard that I found myself responding with, "Huh? What did you say?" At that, a woman I assume was the guy's wife emerged from the back rooms to see what was going on. I don't know if she actually heard what he'd said to me, but she seemed to know that something was off, and after addressing her husband by name, he just totally shut down. He shot her a look with that same spooked expression, then started busying himself like a child caught doing something they shouldn't. I was so taken aback that I just sort of stood there for a moment, totally dumbfounded, until the guy's wife asked me if there was anything else they could help me with. Then, when I told her no, she replied with, "Then I think you better leave." After that, she disappeared into the back again, with her husband flat out refusing to make eye contact with me. I didn't exactly want to make a scene or anything, and the whole interaction made for one of the most awkward of my entire life, so I just walked out of the gas station, got back into my car, and started off on the drive home. And this is where I started to overthink the whole thing. The way I see it, if it was just a town full of rude idiots who didn't want some slick city guy moving out there to bring all his fancy schmancy food, that I could understand. Heck, I'd even appreciate them being honest enough that I wouldn't make the mistake of moving there. But then with the gas station guy, this wasn't small town xenophobia in his voice when he told me not to move here. It was fear, clear and unmistakable. Then the way he reacted when his wife, or whatever that was, appeared, it was like he'd been caught giving away some old dirty secret or something. I mean, he really did act like a scolded child back there, but over what exactly? Like I said, I told my wife about the whole thing the moment I got back home, but I guess she figured that everyone was just kind of being rude. But after hearing it all like this, she admits that she'd have been just as freaked out as I was if it were her in that gas station that day. But all we can do now is wonder what in God's name was going on in that town, and although I know there's no sure way of finding out, it's something I'm nowhere near willing to do. Snooping around that town, poking in other people's business, that sounds like the surest way to me to get killed that I just about ever heard. And besides, whatever it is, I'm not sure I even want to know at all. That gas station attendant didn't seem unfriendly. He seemed like he was trying to warn me. And I'd like to think that I'm smart enough to act on that. I suppose the reason I'm writing this is that you have a pretty big audience, and I figure that someone out there has had the same experience as me in the same eerily quiet Midwestern town. Naming it would be pointless. All kinds of people would descend on that place and hunting for all manner of God knows what, and that sounds like the perfect recipe for disaster to me. Anyway, maybe if you read this on your channel, you might be able to help solve something that had been bothering me for the longest time now. But if not, if this just seems like some dumb city boy is overreacting to a little rural frostiness, then me and my wife will still be big fans of yours. Keep up the great work. If you enjoyed this scary story, listen to thousands more, either over on the Let's Read YouTube channel or podcast.